right, so let me introduce a few folks. On the screen, all the way from Baltimore, Maryland, is Tim Horges. Tim, he even speaks. Tim graduated with an art ed degree, spent a few years at Elkhart Christian School, and then moved east. He'll tell you more about that. You will meet in succession Emily Van Hoff, who graduated in 11. Oh, Tim graduated in 2000. Emily graduated in 2011. Chris in 2001. And Lisa in 2005. And since Tim is up on the screen,
I can leave if you need me to.
go for it. All right. Here's what we're going to talk about tonight. I asked them all to talk about their careers, because all of you are sort of a little anxious about what you're going to do after you leave this place. And there are a whole variety of definitions of success. You guys, I sent them a bunch of questions. You've got a couple of questions in front of you if you want to ask them or ask your own question. We're sort of channeling Jorge Lucero, since he did such a great job of getting you to talk, which you haven't typically done in the past. So without further ado, here's Tim Horges. One bit of further ado. I've asked each of them to talk for like 6 to 10 minutes about their careers, how they got to where they got. And you can ask them questions. I think what we probably ought to do is ask 1 or 2 questions when they're done talking. And I will give you the big chop across the neck, Tim, if you go too long. I'll be standing in the back, you can see me. And a couple of questions for each, and then hopefully we'll have like 10 minutes each, and then some time after that where you can all ask questions of any of them. And everything's fair game. You can ask them what they liked about Trinity. You can ask about what wasn't here that they wish they'd had, what you should be doing, all of that stuff. All right, Tim, you're
on. Okay. Hey, everybody.
Hey.
Meet you virtually. I'm not very good at these things because I can't ever figure out if I should look at your faces on the screens or at the camera. I think that if I look at your faces, it looks like I'm probably looking down, but I think that's just too bad for you. Like John said, I did my undergrad at Trinity. Actually, I ended up there because both of my parents went there back in the day. And they gave me a little scholarship to go, so I felt important and it was nice. Trinity was good for me largely because I came from sort of middle America, Columbus, Ohio. Sort of, when I moved out here, everybody was like, wow, you were really like a corn-fed Midwestern person. I was like, yeah, that's true. So it was good for me largely because it was a place that allowed me to begin to figure out what it was that I cared about as far as making art was concerned. And it gave me a pretty solid basis in, I'll just call it generic art history as far as what had come before and what had led up to where we were at. In my opinion, at that point in time, I didn't necessarily get as much as I would have loved to have gotten, sort of extremely contemporarily what was happening. The thing that did supplement that for me largely was going into the city all the time. I think that it's probably stupid for me to say this, but I say it to everybody, that proximity to a large city and to an arts community is sort of
I think he was going to say important.
an absolute plus. Am I cutting out?
Just for a bit. Yeah.
You guys are getting a little bit, not a time limit yet, you can't get jumpy. So at any rate, access to Chicago.
Go
Houston. And I taught for 4 years at a small private Christian school in South Bend, Indiana, where the necessity of an arts community and access to an arts community became extremely abundantly clear that it was not there. I figured out pretty quickly that I needed that, and I started thinking that, well, obviously graduate school, that's the most important thing that I could do, and I should absolutely do that. And I started applying to graduate schools like crazy. I think I applied for 2 years, and I think I applied to like 14 schools the first year and like 20 schools the second year, and obviously the first year I did not get into. And then the second year I ended up getting accepted into the post-bac program at the Maryland Institute College of Art, which at the time was like ranked 4th for painting, and I was like, well, I really want to be a painter, so that's a great match. So the post-bac is, for those of you who aren't familiar, it's sort of like an intermediate program, in that it's like post your baccalaureate degree, right? But it's sort of pre-grad school. So it was a year-long program, far and away like the best 40 grand that I still owe some debt collector somewhere that I ever spent. And in large part because it got me out of what I consider to be sort of the bubble that I was stuck in, which was sort of like-minded people, similar place to where I grew up, whole like Midwest experience. So for me, the largest part of sort of like forming my work and making me think about my work differently was actually a change of place for me. So moving to Baltimore was crazy, intense. It's a ridiculous city, but I love it. If you watch The Wire, it's probably 100% accurate, but there are still nice pockets of it. So if you're ever bored and you want to watch that HBO series, just be prepared for a lot of swearing, drugs, and shooting of people. So. But it is accurate, I'm not going to lie about that. But the other thing that they don't talk about is how absolutely amazing of an art community there is there. Because post-bac, so after I finished that year-long program, my wife Angela and I, who met at Trinity, got married, decided to stay, bought a house. I found a studio building, built out a studio space, and for 2 years I went back to teaching again. And at that point, I was teaching the high schoolers who got expelled from the schools in Baltimore. So that was awesome. So, and then a studio mate, a person who had a studio in the same building, came into my studio during one of the open studios, and she was like, "Oh, I really like your work. Where'd you go to graduate school?" And I was like, "Oh, I didn't." And she was like, "Really?" She's Scottish, and I'm really bad at accents, but you should apply to the program that I teach at, which made me say, like, I don't want to go to graduate school, and she encouraged me, and blah, 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 blah. Long story short, applied to, basically just made the decision that I wanted to stay in this mid-Atlantic area, which I think is something else we should talk about if you're thinking about graduate school. And so I applied to like 7 schools that are around here, and I got into 6 of them with the exception of Yale, because nobody likes that place anyways, because you just go there to learn how to not make art. So at any rate, long story short, I ended up getting into a state school, University of Maryland, College Park, and it was a fine program. In large part, it worked for me because I had figured out pretty much exactly what I wanted to get out of a graduate school experience by doing the post-bac and by having spent 6 years out of the undergraduate experience and sort of learning what it was that I cared enough about to make work about. Figuring out the balance between like real life and art making, because that's a very difficult thing, in my opinion, to do. So I went, it was great. They gave me an assistantship, so I had like the full tuition waiver. And then they gave me a stipend, so I actually got paid to go to grad school, which I totally suggest you people should all look into, because it's really it's a pain in the butt to pay back your student loans later in life, which nobody else ever talks about either. And then I won a teaching fellowship from them, so I taught there for the year following my graduate school experience. And it's in the DC area, just like slightly south of here, Baltimore. So it was just sort of an expansion, a natural expansion of arts community that I was already involved in. So, love you too, John. So it was good for me that way too, and I ended up rolling into a significant number of sort of adjunct positions. And I'd always done, Chris Pierrick, the guy who's in the back, standing back there. We have both worked doing framing up houses during college, and I had done a lot of trade work before that, and then after that as well. So it was seemed natural too to me that I ended up just sort of rolling in my side work into a business. So now I own a construction business, which is weird. But both my business partner and myself are practicing artists who live in Baltimore City. And our business model, for lack of a better word, I think that's something you're supposed to have, but I'm not really sure, is that we actually only hire artists. And we primarily work within the context of historic restoration. So we do a lot of old homes, sort of modernization of these homes, updating systems. So it's kind of this weird, ridiculous thing where I teach adjunct at Micah now, which is cool, because I moved here to go there, and now I get to teach there, which feels pretty awesome. And the community here in Baltimore is supportive enough that I was able to just sort of like start a business. And ta-da! So we've got 11 full-time employees now, and it's awesome. It allows me also to have a studio that's pretty ridiculous. Baltimore's a really cheap city too. That's one of the reasons I stayed here too. I'm only like 2 hours from Philly, like 3.5 from New York if I drive fast, and like an hour from DC. Boston's 8. So like accessibility to other arts communities, I think, is also an important thing to think about. And so for me, it works out really well. It allows me to have access to the Eastern Seaboard without having to pay like New York City prices or DC prices for living or for studio rent. So my studio is like 2,500 square feet and I pay $500 a month. Like, it's friggin' awesome. It has like 18-foot ceilings and a skylight that's ridiculous. So it affords opportunities that aren't necessarily available in other large cities. So I'm getting the from John. So I guess that I am done talking to all of you now.
Right. 2 questions. Your own or off the sheet? Whatever you want.
You guys are very prepared.
What did Trinity miss?
Sorry, come again?
What did Trinity miss?
So, well, it's actually kind of funny because this, I don't know. I like stories, so I'm going to tell you a story. I went to a wedding last weekend, which was pretty awesome. It was ridiculous. It was super fun. They made up their own drink and everything. It was so cool. And it was in the middle of nowhere, and I don't really like the middle of nowhere because it reminds me of the Midwest too much. But no offense, but it is really weird to fly into like Michigan or Chicago to visit family, and I can just see for miles. Like, that's very, very off-putting to me now that I'm used to like hills and water and stuff. But at any rate, I ran into a guy, and he was like, "Oh, hey, Christian, my buddy, who was getting married, he told me that you made that painting that's in the front room," because I gave him a painting because he designed a catalog for an exhibition that I was in. So, and I was like, "Oh, I'm glad you like it," you know. He's like, "Where did you go to school?" And I was like, "I went to, University of Maryland for grad school, Micah for post-bac, and a little place in Chicago for undergrad." He's like, "Oh, well, I am a curator at the Museum of Contemporary Art in Chicago, so what school did you go to?" And I was like, "Oh, Lord." So I was like, the Trinity Christian College. It's in Palos Heights, which is on the southwest side of Chicago, assuming that obviously somebody in that position would have no idea what I was talking about. And he was like, "Oh, yeah, they have the Searbelt Gallery there, right?" And I was like, "Yeah." And he knew the guy that ran it before John took it over this year. And so in my time there, I think that the one thing that Trinity missed pretty significantly, in my opinion, was a connection to the larger arts community outside of the sort of Trinity Christian bubble thing that we all get involved in when we're in academia with like-minded people. And so it sounds like they're working on rectifying that in a pretty solid fashion. So I was excited to hear that. But I think that that was definitely the thing that, in my experience, did not work very well for me. But like I said, Chris and I went to the city a lot, so that was always fun. But yeah, just getting involved in things outside of the. How many people go to Trinity now? 1,100. Okay, so that's good. There were only like 700, I think, when I was there. So getting outside of that 700 or 1,100 bubble is, in my opinion, extremely important. If you actually want to go on and do art after this, you have to be able to relate to people that are involved in the field in a different way than you maybe think about it.
Great, thanks. Who's up next?
Do I just sit here, John?
You can sit
What do I
there.
do now?
You can sit there, yes, do it.
Nice work, Tim.
Hi, Chris.
How you doing?
That's Chris, right?
Yeah. I'm gonna close.
Can you sit in the front row so I can see you while you talk?
Sure. I'm gonna close this monitor so I don't have to look at you the whole time.
Oh, come on, let's make faces. It'll be fun.
Yeah, so my name's Chris Pierick. I graduated in '01. How many of you are designers? Okay, good. I'm going to talk to you about design mostly. I'll talk briefly about my time here and then sort of move on to my career trajectory. So when I was here, I showed up and I was an undeclared major. I sort of started off in the business department, sort of exploring marketing and things like that, and was also doing some communication things. But I ended up taking an art class with John, and John sort of said, you should check out the art department a little bit. So I went that direction, and in essence, I think I sort of landed in a really interesting spot for me. That the design department sort of spoke to me in a really interesting way. My background, my mom is a painter. She's an artist. My dad is a construction guy. He builds houses and has built giant houses and small houses. And so growing up, that's sort of what I did. I was either working with my mom as an artist, she's teaching me different techniques and things like that, or working with my dad who was running a business and building houses. So these two things sort of collided for me inside of graphic design, this business side and this art side, and it was really sort of a fascinating thing for me. So at Trinity, I went through the art department. It was much different now than when I was there. It was an art barn and a double wide trailer, so we called it the art farm. And the double wide trailer was a bunch of it was a computer lab, and that's sort of where I spent a lot of time. I really dug in there, and I spent a lot of time sort of learning programs and experimenting and things like that. Beyond Trinity, when I left Trinity, I got a job at a publishing company. They published a variety of books. It was in Chicagoland. It was in Naperville. At Source Books, I mainly did public relations work, sort of designing postcards and press kits and things like that for about my first year there. And then my second year and my third year, I started to design the catalog, which is a really intense project. And then I also designed book covers and book internals. So basically, what happened to me there at Sourcebooks was really interesting. I think that the trajectory of a designer's life is constantly learning. And it's probably true anywhere, but I think it's specifically true, especially true for designers. So how do you constantly learn? You can sort of force it on yourself, and the other way you sort of constantly learn is through collaboration with colleagues. And so I was surrounded by amazing colleagues that taught me a million things. But specifically at Sourcebooks, the thing that really sort of that I was really able to start to push and learn from colleagues was typography. That learning typography sort of changed the way I designed. So whereas now when I start any project, when I start any design project, I start with picking typefaces that make sense for the thing I'm designing, whether it's inside of a time period or a certain stylistic choice, things like that. But specifically, I worked with a woman who went to the University of Illinois, and after she graduated, she went and worked at Nike for 5 years. And she, after she worked at Nike, she came back to Chicago and implanted herself at Sourcebooks, and she sort of became my mentor. So I owe so much to her. She really taught me and pushed me on my typographical skills. Without that sort of stuff, I don't think I would have made it very far, to be honest. So for her, she pointed me in the direction where I would read. She made me read Robert Bringhurst, right? Ellen's smiling. The Elements of Typographic Style. I must have read that book 10 times. It's a brilliant little book, but pushed me so hard. The other thing I really learned at Sourcebooks was printing and manufacturing. So at Sourcebooks, we're making product. We're developing products to be purchased. So that was a really sort of fascinating thing. Not only to sort of honor the content in the book with your graphic design, but be able to honor the content in a way that by choosing paper, the type of paper you print on, or different printing techniques, things like that. So maybe how to use foil stamping, or how to use different finishing techniques to give a book a feel. That pushes the design beyond just typography and color and photography, but pushes it to an entire experience. So that to me, the entire experience thing, I sort of learned in designing books. And I think it's important that throughout a designer's sort of career, you sort of take these things, as you learn them, you take them with you into the future, right? So after 3 years at Sourcebooks, I got kind of burnt out on design, and to be honest, nobody really makes a lot of money in publishing, and so I was married, and my wife and I had moved to the city, which that's another huge step in my life and my design career. To move to the city and implant yourself inside of an artist community was really sort of formulating for me. And my wife, she was an art major as well. She did her grad work at UIC in sculpture. So I sort of saw what she was doing at UIC, and I was sort of designing, and quit my job, and I decided to take a job moving art. I wasn't doing design anymore. That year, I took a year off, and I moved art around the city, from different galleries to the Museum of Contemporary Art, the Art Institute, to collectors' homes. We did installations, public art installations all over the city, and I saw a totally different side of the art world than I had ever even known was out there. It was a really great year, but I was sort of missing a lot of there was something missing from my life, and at some point I really started to I started to work really hard to do freelance work. So I was doing a lot of freelance work, and I was working with Mark Weirdo a lot, who was a photographer. He was a business major here at Trinity, and he would send work my way, and I would send work his way, and we would sort of collaborate. And came after about a year of sort of freelancing and things. Mark asked me to go with him and do a documentary. We were going to fly to Romania and shoot a documentary about a medical clinic that they had opened up in sort of post-Cold War Romania. So it turned out that I couldn't do it, so I suggested that he take Brett Hukamo with him, who was another Trinity grad, a filmmaker. And so Mark and Brett flew to Romania, and all this time I'm doing freelance work, and they come back and they get amazing footage. And Mark approaches me and says, "We should start a company together. We've come back with such amazing footage from Romania. you're doing such interesting design work, and we sort of had all these different creative types work, and so we did it. We started a company together, and Cultivate Studios is in the South Loop of Chicago. We are currently 12 people. It's a slew of people. It's designers, it's photographers, it's video folks. We have iOS developers, we have web developers, and so we work all together to sort of deliver the entire creative package to our clients. Right now I work directly with designers. I have taken a little bit of a step back from the actual pushing of pixels and pens and pen tools and all that, and I do more strategy work and creatives. My role is now creative director instead of designer. So a big part of my job is just working with clients to understand who they are and what they are about fundamentally. And my job as creative director is to dig into the sort of values that organizations have and translate those values into compelling messages that I can then take to designers or video folks or whoever, so that we can work together to tell those stories. So fundamentally, that's what I do at Cultivate now. I think I covered everything. You have any questions? Yeah.
If you were to go back to school now, would you go more into the marketing aspects of design, or do you think you would stay the way that you did it?
I think I would absolutely stay the way I do. I would do an art major again. For me, that sort of creative exploration is pretty fundamental to who I am. Even though I'm not doing the design work, we always talk about something that sort of concept, design thinking. It's a way to sort of approach a problem. So as a designer, as my background is in design, so I approach problems or communication problems from that sort of design thinking space. And I think that designers sort of think differently than other folks. Like I really believe that that design thinking is really sort of an important thing to explore for a designer. But that's, really what we do, what I do now is I employ design thinking to problems. So how do we approach a problem from a perspective that solves that problem? I've heard a lot of folks talk about designers as problem solvers. I also like to think of designers as problem creators. So when I go into a company and the company says, hey, you know what we need is a brochure. When we show up, we dig into that and we say, okay, well, what is the brochure supposed to do? We sort of ask all these questions, and sometimes it comes out that, yeah, you do need a brochure, but sometimes it comes out that, no, you don't actually need a brochure. I think what you need first is a better name, or whatever that thing is. So we try to create a platform based on an organization or a company's values that we can place all of our sort of creative strategy on top of, and then use media or culture, basically, to tell those stories in interesting ways, in compelling ways. And that's the key piece. Find the value, and then tell that story in a compelling way. Of course, you have to tell that story in a compelling way. You have to find the audience. You have to find the right channel to approach your audience, all those things, right? So that's what Cultivate is doing now. We started as a small shop, 3 people, and we were, people come to us for videos. Now people come to us for strategy work, and we use that strategy as a platform to tell the organizational story. Anything else? That's a long way to answer your question, but
Got the job done.
Thanks, Chris.
yep.
So next up is Emily Van Hoff, but before Emily talks, I want Mike to raise his hand. Mike Vanderay, the guy who did the black and white photos right back there, one of the artists in the show. And Emily, from 2011, you're up.
Hi guys. I just graduated in 2011, so I'm really not that far ahead of you guys. And my concentration was in graphic design, but I also took advanced sculpture 3 times, so hopefully I can speak to both sides of the party. I've done kind of a little bit of everything since I graduated, so I'm going to just kind of talk you through the jobs that I've had, because I think it's a pretty good sample of like what's out there for new designers. My first internship was at Proximity Magazine, which is a small local art publication that's won a few awards in the Print Design Annual. Nobody who works for them gets paid, so it's very much just a passion project. And we kind of just hung out and made stuff, which was really fun. And it also helped me meet some new people who introduced me to new opportunities, including Typeforce, which I was in 2011. And that's a really fantastic typography show that I highly suggest to both designers and artists. I think it happens in like February or March every year. After that, I had an internship at the Marketing Store, which is a marketing agency. Used to be out in Lombard and has recently moved downtown. I worked in the mock-up department, and one of their biggest clients, they do the whole Monopoly campaign for McDonald's. So I spent a lot of time cutting out like burger clamshell boxes with an X-Acto knife and taping them together, which was actually a little bit of a dream come true. I love X-Acto knives. And a mock-up department is kind of a good place to be as a new designer, because you're kind of the end of the design spectrum, and you can see how all the different departments work together, and sort of the different jobs that exist. Because when you graduate, you're not necessarily just a designer. Like, there's very specific fields that you can go into other than just general design. After that, I got a freelance job at Abelson Taylor, which is a big pharmaceutical branding agency downtown. And yeah, well, it was pharmaceutical, so I did a lot of formatting, fine print, and like revising the same informational booklet about 36 times, which was not my dream job, but it was a really good learning experience. I had to learn like the super nitty-gritty technical details of like InDesign and Illustrator, the sort of things that you don't learn until you're in the thick of it and you have to be learning them. So that was a good experience, and also taught me a lot about what I didn't want to do. After that, I started freelancing on my own, sort of, which is what I've been doing for the last 2.5 years. And freelancing looks a little bit different for everybody. For me, I worked mainly under other freelance designers. So they would do the work of getting clients and meeting with them and figure out what they needed, and then they would come to me to do like the actual making stuff side, which, especially as a new designer, was a really good way for me to work, and it kind of like built my confidence, I think. I mainly worked for Hyde Creative, which is my cousin's design studio out of Grand Rapids. And when I was at the bigger agencies, I was very much like a small piece of a big puzzle, but working with Rachel, she's just a one-woman team, so I got to be part of everything from the beginning to the end, which was a fun experience. And she has a wide variety of kinds of clients, so we got to do like a lot of different kind of materials. So I got to work on everything from like annual reports to event branding to logo design to advertisements, sort of a little bit of everything. And again, just kind of like introduced me to the things that are possible as a designer. My favorite client with her was the Steelcase Foundation annual report, which we did a couple years in a row, and ended up winning 2 West Michigan Addy Awards for, which was pretty exciting. But my work with her wasn't nearly full-time, so I did some other things as well. I started 2 Etsy shops. The most recent one is based around my newfound love for hand lettering, which is what everything in the gallery, pretty much everything there, is relating to. Let's see. I think, so that's something that I've learned on my own time outside of work. And making work after college can be a really interesting experience because you go from an environment where you're constantly around people who are seeing what you're making and you're always like talking about your work, to a place where like maybe to a place where like maybe nobody even knows if you're making anything or not. So my advice when you guys get to that point is just to force yourself to be working on something a little bit every day. Even if you don't think it's good or meaningful, or if you don't know what to do, like just sit down and like do anything, because I think that puts you in a mind space to be thinking, and that's when new ideas come. And eventually you'll figure out what it is that you're really passionate about making, and that makes it a lot easier to get in the studio every day and keep making stuff. And I actually think that it's important to be doing a little bit of that while you're still in school, whether that's on your own time or like in an advanced studio class that's pretty heavily self-directed. Because when you can have work in your portfolio, that's something that you're really excited about instead of just a class assignment. It makes it a lot easier to talk through your portfolio with a potential employer, and I think that excitement comes through to your employer. So that's definitely a good thing to be doing. It's also good to keep sharing work with people after you graduate, and there's a lot of ways that you can do that. I do it through Instagram, which is maybe a little bit lame, but it's like just enough motivation to keep me making things and to keep posting things. And if you just like keep putting a ton of work out into the universe, eventually somebody's gonna find it, presuming that it's like somewhat good, I guess. And I can vouch for that because recently Facebook found me through my Instagram account, and I just finished a small hand lettering project with them that's gonna be launching around Thanksgiving, I think. So yeah, I would just encourage you guys to keep making stuff and keep putting it out there, and to just work really hard. I'm not like a face-to-face networking kind of a person at all, but my route has sort of managed to accomplish the same thing. Let's see. And then back to my work experience, Hyde Creative was really slow this summer, but Cultivate Studios was looking for someone to come on board on a freelance position. So I've been working with them since about June, and I actually just accepted a full-time position with them. So Chris is now my boss, officially. I guess, I don't know, he told you a little bit about Cultivate, but the way that it's been really good for me, I think, is that it's that small environment where I still get to work on projects from the beginning to the end, but it's a lot more collaborative than just like working from home in my sweatpants with my cat. So I think that's been really good for me.
You could bring the cat in anytime.
He would hate it. He despises people, especially men. Let's see. I think I had something else to say. Something I would encourage you guys to do while you're still in school is just to take advantage of like every possible opportunity that you can. Even if it's here at Trinity, those things are actually very important because your professors have great connections, and your fellow peers will have good connections someday too. But they're only going to want to share those with you if they know that you're someone they can count on to actually do the work and to do a good job. So when you can help with installations in the gallery, or sign up to do with critiques with visiting artists, or just generally be in the art all of the time so that when opportunities come up, you're the one who's here to do them. I think that's been really good. And I have one more beef with the current art department. I don't know if I came last year, but I came to SARS the few years before that, and I think it has gone drastically downhill, and I'm very disappointed. So I encourage you all to, like, 60 seconds is longer than you think it is, so like write something out and prepare and actually say something meaningful. I strongly encourage you to do that. It's more fun that way. So that's all I have. Any questions?
Where do you see yourselves in 10 years?
Oh gosh, I have no idea. Hopefully still making things. Hand lettering has definitely become a huge passion of mine lately. So my Etsy shop that I have is a lot of sort of just the hand lettering things that I want to make, which has been fun. So hopefully still doing something like that, and maybe also being able to incorporate that more heavily in the like real job work that I do. And I love what I'm doing at Cultivate, so who knows, maybe I'll stick around for a while. Anything else?
Any more? Right. And final, oh, yes.
Hi, Lisa.
How's it going?
Good. How are you?
Good. Okay, I'm gonna put you down too. It's too hard to look at your face on the podium. My name is Lisa Walcott. Like John said, I finished in 2005 at Trinity. I actually got here, oddly, by visiting my cousin who married Tim. That was my first college visit when I was like 17. We had a good time in Chicago. Anyway, while I was here, I actually had a painting concentration. Most of my paintings were sculptures that hung on the wall, so they kind of counted for a painting class. I do think that's one of the really positive things about the programs here, is there's just a ton of flexibility. The definitions are very flexible if you have a good reason for what you're doing. And I think that's, blurring those boundaries is it's kind of how the art world works anyways. There's not like painting and sculpture and installation necessarily. Let's see here. One other thing I did while I was here, I did an internship in New York City with 2 artists my senior year. Stayed for the summer, and I think that's greatly influenced, like Tim said, getting out of the Midwest. I'm from Michigan, so it was really good for me to stay in the city, to experience the art world there, and actually the connections I made with the artists that I worked with probably helped me get into grad school as well. I got some recommendations from those artists, and they both went to Cranbrook, where I ended up going to grad school. So there's just really, I think it's really important to get yourself out there. Yeah. I took 3 years off of school after I finished at Trinity, and I was actually teaching high school art at that time and just working in the studio a ton. And then I also have a photography business. So that's something that started about 10 years ago when I finished here. I just started learning the camera. My fiance at the time had kind of started a business, now my husband, and we just started working together. And that's been a really good way for me to be able to travel and do exhibitions, and just being self-employed and having that flexible schedule lets me have a studio practice at the same time. It's probably different for everybody, but I think that's been pretty key, that I can take off for a week and go do an installation down in Tennessee because I didn't have to take a week off of work. So I went to grad school in 2008, and that was really, I think everybody's path is different, but for me that was really key, and my practice changed a ton at that time. I was a very feel the materials, find your process as you make the work, and do a lot of planning. And while I was there, one of the biggest shifts was just looking ahead in projects and getting out of the way that I liked to make things. I think the combination of those two things, planning ahead and making sketches and seeing a concept through, I finally had a chance to do that when I was in grad school, and partly from the feedback that I got there as well. Let's see. Since then, I've been exhibiting quite a bit. Kind of an insane exhibition schedule, to be honest. I kind of take almost every show that comes my way, which is maybe some people would say that's not the smartest thing to do, but for me, I think it's kind of just worked out that I take every project really seriously, no matter the venue. I want to be proud of whatever work I show, and like Emily was saying, I'm not the best like face-to-face networker. I've always thought, if I make good work, could that actually get me somewhere? And I think that actually has sort of worked out for me. Like, I just do my very best in, you know, a little gallery in Benton Harbor, Michigan, and then somebody sees it and I get invited to do something else. So for me, that's kind of not my strategy, but I think that's just been, you know, how things have worked out. I participated in Art Prize in 2010. I don't know if you guys are familiar with Grand Rapids, that like kind of strange art competition that they have. And a curator from the Eli and Edith Broad Art Museum, which is a brand new museum in East Lansing, saw my work there. So I kind of thought, I was like, oh, it's just Art Prize, like this is kind of dumb. I don't really care, but I put a ton of work into the project. And they saw the work, and that's, you know, how I got one of the biggest shows that I've had in my career so far. So, and then another thing that I am settled back in West Michigan, and I've heard everybody talk about the art community around you being really important. For me, I've kind of used, and there is an art community there. I don't want to completely poo-poo that, but at the same time, I've made sure to like get out quite a bit. Like a lot of my shows are elsewhere. What are you doing, Tim? Okay, what are you doing?
I love you.
I love you too. Okay. My husband and I actually bought a little Winnebago RV a couple years ago, and a lot of my shows like will actually take like a full road trip, and I'll make drawings on the road, and it'll be like a whole experience. So I do get out, I do surround myself with interesting people and places, and then I just kind of use my like quiet little hometown with a lot of space around it that I actually sort of like as home base. So let's see. As far as things that I wish that I had done differently at Trinity, I know that was one of the questions on the survey. I think I took my body of work very seriously at that time, thinking like, oh, this is the type of work I make. I use found objects and I put them together, and I really wish that I had maybe been a little more open to just like absorbing everything I possibly could. I think it's just important to learn a lot of skills, especially at this point in your art making career. You know, you never know if you're gonna love like wiring up motors or like I actually ended up loving, or you know, welding or whatever it might be. So I think just like absorbing those skills and like learning a lot about that kind of thing is really helpful. So I think, any questions? Yep.
Would you say, I mean, working in a particular field sometimes, it's really difficult to like kind of be a light, you know, Christian influence. And I was just wondering how you personally deal with those kind of interactions and just kind of maintain your Christian influence wherever you go.
That's a really good question. I would say, I mean, a lot of my work is not overtly Christian or anything like that, but I do think there's like a really like redemptive and positive narrative to a lot of my work. So yeah, I guess I would say just by being like a positive influence with the people that I meet.
Can you tell me what her question was? Because I couldn't hear that at all.
She was asking how in a secular field I go about being a Christian artist, basically, correct?
Yeah, and that can apply to anybody who.
Yeah,
What did she say?
that can apply to anybody if you want to field that question.
No. Well, I mean, yeah, I think that's a question that should be asked of business majors too. I think it's sort of a really weird dichotomy that people assume that because we're in a visual art field that question is more important for us to understand. I think that's kind of, I don't like that that's sort of like the automatic thing. I think that there's an interesting idea that as Christians we should be in the world but not of the world, and I think that it's a fine line to walk, and I think that people look at the visual arts and assume that that's more difficult, but I don't really think that it's more difficult to figure out how to be a positive force or a positive influence or a positive person in an arts community than it would be to be a positive or beneficial influence on Wall Street. Like, I think that there's a really unfair focus in Christianity on the sort of evils of visual art. And I think it goes back to sort of the Platonic duality and all that crap that John will teach you about later. So it's just, yeah, I understand the question, but I think that, I also think it's a cultural question. I think that it's a question for me that I get a lot out of the sort of Christian culture that I'm involved in, where people are just sort of like, well, I don't understand how you can be an artist and be a Christian if you're not painting crucifixes. And like, I don't know, janitors don't mop and like make crucifixes on the floor when they mop, and like it's just like this really weird idea that like, because we make something that's visual, it has to be something that's overtly Christian, or that we have to sort of like constantly wear, like, it's like we should all go to Ash Wednesday every freaking day and have that on our forehead so that everybody knows immediately that we're Christians. But nobody expects that, perhaps, if you're in a business meeting every day, you know? And so there's just this really weird line that you guys are gonna have to probably figure out how to walk between like your grandma asking why you're not painting, I don't know what she's gonna expect you to paint, but it's probably not gonna be what you end up painting if you're actually trying to make art. So it's a really weird thing that kind of irks me. Sorry.
Any more questions for any of the panelists?
Did Baker say something?
He asked if there's any more questions for the panelists.
Right, so thank you very, very much, all of you.